Alrighty, what's up, folks? Going to dive right in to a concept called forced invocation. Now, the basic way to explain forced invocation is you use traumatic event, maybe like a real serious trauma or possibly even just micro trauma. And I call it you pre-formally modify a person's consciousness. In other words, a part of a person's consciousness that they aren't aware of, nor have they ever made modifications to consciously. You modify that part of a person, and this is called preformal modification. And what the purpose of preformal modification is when you modify someone later on, when the modified person becomes aware within a particular area of their pool of consciousness that you modified, they'll begin running processes and forming conclusions based on how you modified them. And when they come to those conclusions, they'll think that they're their own conclusions. So they'll assert the I am, they'll invoke the I am upon themselves, and you'll have successfully basically turned them into a servitor, kinda. But that's forced invocation, and forced invocation is a very serious problem across our whole society. Probably as bad as polarization, intentional polarization. We'll have to talk about that another time. Another example of forced invocation is in like public school, when scornful mocking dominators with no paradigm, who are self-absorbed wholly in materialism and vampiric behavior, whenever they dominate the group dynamic, they force invoke a perceived structure in other members of the group dynamic. This happens in public school all the time, where you have a very, very small group of people, very small group of children who basically torment the entire group, and then all the other members in the group either become seed iterations, like reflective iterations of the dominators, kind of becoming miniature fan dominators. So you can poison the entire group. And the way this works is the way you destroy an entire group dynamic, like what's happened in America and Western cultures, is like I said before, you force invoke a perception of the structure of the group dynamic itself, causing other members to feel like they're left out or they don't fit in or blah blah blah. So people will have ideas about the group dynamic, which they make conclusions about, rather than asserting over the group dynamic themselves, such as like loyal people, honest people, the faithful. Like, instead of them actually taking the group dynamic back over, most of the time they just give up because the force invocation worked, and they have this false construct of the group dynamic in their mind lying to them, so they give up. So dominators take over the group dynamic. Materialistic, scornful, mocking, vampiric dominators that drag society into primal ages, that drag us all away from intellect, that drag us all away from true self, that drag us all away from progressive society. These types of people are defended in our society, defended by law. They're lifted up. Other examples of forced invocation is how capitalism has dominated both the consumer and its own labor force in such a way that the capitalistic empires, I'm not even going to say corporations, I'm going to say the capitalist empires, because they are global empires. They don't own land, but they're global empires, international empires. These so-called corporations, they're bigger than countries. You understand? And the presidents of these corporations are bigger than the presidents of countries, and people don't understand that. What's happened is people have become enslaved. The consumers become enslaved because they can no longer produce their own necessities. They can no longer provide necessities for themselves. They become fiends. They're addicts to a system which, if that system is taken away, all the addicts addicted to it are going to die off. and the capitalist empires have also learned to, over time, dominate their labor force, so that the labor force is addicted to being labor. The labor force must stay labor, or else they'll die. Because if they try and fight against the establishment, the monopoly, then they'll be targeted and taken down by the capitalist empires that are ruthless. It's wholly about profit, completely about profit. Hoarding wealth, not even spending, just hoarding mass amounts of wealth. Now, even worse these days is you have these capitalist empires, which have become political, and most of them becoming in the political sphere to the very, very far left, which is very, very bad. Because as we've seen, like I said before, like how the group dynamic is dominated in public school, the group dynamic of our across social spheres of our society has been dominated. You know, all the normal people who just want to have a family and just want their needs provided for. They don't want to fuck every single female in the world. They don't want to suck every single cock. They don't want all their neighbors' money. You know what I'm saying? Just normal people, they give up. Because all these freaking wackos are all over the place, roaring and yelling, making scenes everywhere, dominating the group dynamic. So people start to think, well, society's just fucked up. They force invoke society's fucked up. So people, when they imagine society, when they imagine attempting to change society, they just imagine total failure. Because they realize, based on their perception, based on the forced invocation that they've been subdued under, there's nothing they can do. They've been subjugated. This is how it is for most of all of America. Another great example of this is all the hysteria around Trump. People were so excited to jump on the bandwagon, and be a little Trump fanboy. And then a year and a half later, now they're voting for the left and wearing females' clothes and questioning their gender. So their little Trump fandom sure ended quick after they got polarized. But I'll have to talk about polarization another time and how it works together with forced invocation to essentially delete free will and thoughtful consideration out of society. Now, just as a brief intro, polarization occurs, well, I'll give an example. The political left, all across the world, is not concerned with any issues unless those issues create hysteria and polarization. The left primary tactic is to use hysteria, fear, to compel people beyond thought, free will, considerate thought, reason. And they construct narratives based on they build these narratives using very, very thin, narrow talking points that are almost like facts. But see, facts are used for discovery. Talking points are used by ideologues to polarize and to usurp people's free will from them so they can't think for themselves. That's why you have all these political YouTube ads and these political social media ads and these political TV ads and all this nonsense everywhere with the emotional music playing in the background. Maybe they'll show a picture of George Bush or a picture of Trump with, like, you know, dark music in the background, like, this guy has done all these things. And they'll specifically pick a person with a certain type of voice. Like if they're appealing to a specific dynamic, They might pick like a 22-year-old young sounding female, but not a white one. Maybe a Mexican, or perhaps an Arab. And they'll use her to talk in the background about the evils of Republicans while emotional music stirs you. Because these types of political ideologues, they're incapable of true communication, of true two-way communication, conveying actual ideas and goals. What these people have done is they have a vision of what they want society to not be. They do not have a vision of what they want society to be. They have a vision of what they do not want society to be. And so these political types, they polarize and they use force invocation to isolate and alienate. And they use schemes. And all their narratives, all their talking points, all their political presentations are schemes that target you, that target your organism, that target your brain, that target the chemicals in your brain, because they can't appeal to your reason. They have to force your brain to release chemicals to induce an emotional state which will take your body over and force you to do things which you would not normally do. This is what the political left has done. And the political left and the political right have worked together. Now, I don't just mean to make this all about politics, but I'm just using examples in politics because it's immediate. But there are a lot of counterculturalist efforts in the occult community, various occult communities with absolutely no foundation whatsoever, no foundation of their own, yet they so zealously, like a bigot, fight for their team, fight for their counterculturalist team. And many of these occult types can be very easily qualified and labeled as pseudo-philosophers, pseudo-deconstructionalists, who have no paradigm whatsoever, but who sit in the corner and in the shadows, waiting for the opportunity where they might jump forth, leaping in front of some poor person or some mentally unstable person and say something like, "Why don't you go kill yourself?" Or, "You aren't entitled to anything." Now, you'll find a lot of forced invocation. I'm just going to go through a list right now. In the light worker communities, they're very manipulative. Light workers are very manipulative. They've created a false construct called the astral, which to everyone else is some so-called spiritual reality. But it's an inside kind of knowledge. It's an inner circle knowledge between light workers. And all light workers know that any time a light worker references the astral, they're deceiving you into thinking they're talking about a supernatural place. But what they're actually talking about is the internet. The deep web, internet histories, and Left-Hand Path and Discordians are all into this too. Not just them, all these little agents, these little purpose-driven agents run around changing our world because they just want to change the world so bad and be something, have a purpose. So much focus on identity in the West. People in the West, the westernized people, are always so absorbed in identity, being something, needing to be something, needing to accomplish something. Many identities are forced, invoked upon people. Young people being sexualized, young people being encouraged to become homosexuals and become bisexual. Just more examples of forced invocation. But anyway, I'm going to close this out.